Okay, let's dive into this. We are looking at some pretty potent source material today. It's a major speech from Sun Myung-moon back in 1975 at the Korean Day of Hope banquet in Seoul. And, even he acknowledged at the time there was a lot of controversy swirling around him in Korea, sure, but also in the
Oh,
U.S.
absolutely. A heavy environment, as he put it. And that's key, isn't it? When you tackle material like this, you almost have to, well, set aside the political noise for a moment. Our mission today is really just that, to pull out the core philosophical thread of this speech. He called it a world of living for the sake of others. We're basically going to map out for you how he builds this idea. Starts with theology, kind of abstract, right? But then he brings it right down to daily life, global politics, even personal destiny.
Right. And he kicks it off with something we all kind of feel, I think, this like deep yearning for something lasting, eternal love, unchanging peace, that perfect ideal happiness that doesn't fade. But then you look around the world and, well, it's mostly distrust, isn't it? Chaos. Self-interest seems to rule. So his question is, if we can't reach these absolute things ourselves, being relative and finite, where do we look? He says, well, you have to rely on an absolute being, God.
Yeah, and this is where his theology really takes a fascinating, maybe even surprising turn. Most traditional views see God as, totally self-sufficient, all-powerful creator, done. But Moon argues something different. He says even God, this absolute being, can't actually achieve the love, the ideal, the happiness, the peace he wants alone.
Wait, hold on there. That really struck me too. If God is absolute omnipotent, why would he need an object partner? Fundamentally, that sounds, well, it sounds pretty radical, like redefining what divine power even means.
It is radical, definitely. But it's completely central to his whole system. The need isn't about weakness, you see. It's about the very nature of absolute love itself. Love, by definition, needs a subject and an object, right, to be exchanged. So if God is the subject of this absolute love, he logically needs an eternal object to share it with. Otherwise, that love just stays potential, unrealized. And that object partner, that's humanity.
He uses this really simple, very human analogy to explain that reciprocal need, doesn't he? He asks you to think about your own life. Like when you're looking for a spouse or raising kids, do you want someone inferior to you? Or do you always hope they'll be, better than you in some way?
We always want the better object, don't we? The more noble partner. And he just applies that same logic straight to God. He concludes, based on this kind of fundamental human desire for the best in our partner, that God actually wishes for us, his human object partners, to become better than himself, more precious, even more noble than the creator.
Wow. That is genuinely startling when you think about it. If you take that seriously, it completely shifts the value of humanity, doesn't it? Because if older theologies keep this strict hierarchy, creator way up here, creation way down there, Moon says, well, then you can never have true, shared, reciprocal love or peace. The terms aren't equal enough.
Exactly, because God is eternal, absolute, unique. His object partners must also have those qualities. Eternal value, absolute value, unique value. That's the only way the relationship itself can be eternal. It shifts humanity from just being, servants to being necessary eternal partners.
So, okay, what does this mean for someone just trying to figure things out, their place in it all? The takeaway he gives seems almost simple. He suggests that if those ideals, eternal love, peace, etc., if they really resonate deep inside us, if we feel that pull towards perfection, towards eternity, that feeling itself is a kind of proof that God exists. And if God is eternal and we're his necessary partners, then we must be eternal too. It suddenly makes our life right here, right now, incredibly significant.
Yes, it connects our inner world, our deepest desires, directly to the cosmic blueprint, gives meaning right away. And once he's laid that theological foundation, then he can pivot to the practical side. How does it work?
Okay, theology grounded. Now, the application, the mechanism. He calls the core concept living for the sake of others, LSO, let's say. And he says this isn't just a nice idea, it's the original ideal, the basic principle the whole universe was built on. Why this principle? He claims God chose it specifically to make sure the path to unity wouldn't get blocked by selfishness.
And this LSO formula then becomes the measure for basically every human role and relationship. He defines a true relationship, parent, spouse, patriot, as one where the subject is willing to be born for, live for, and even die for the object.
So like true parents are fundamentally oriented towards their children. Born for them, live for them, would die for them. A true husband feels that same total commitment to his wife. It's a complete 100% investment, no holding back.
And he immediately broadens it out, takes it public. He needs historical proof, right, to show it's a universal law. So he brings up the idea of a true patriot, and he points to Admiral Lee Sun-shin. Now, for anyone not familiar, Admiral Lee is a massive figure in Korean history, 16th century naval commander.
Yeah.
Famous turtle ships. Won battles against impossible odds.
Right, the ultimate selfless leader archetype. Moon holds him up as someone who lived and died not for personal gain, but purely for the sake of others. The nation, the king above him, the people he served. His life becomes a kind of template for LSO and politics.
But the ultimate example, the big example he uses is Jesus Christ. Applying that LSO lens to spiritual history, he says Jesus is the greatest saint precisely because he lived and died for all humanity, and crucially, took that extra step, praying for his enemies, even as they were killing him. That level of selflessness, extending even to attackers, that's presented as the absolute pinnacle of the principle.
And then to make this LSO thing feel less like a moral rule and more like, I don't know, a law of physics, he uses that great analogy, human biology. He talks about physical shapes.
Right. That observation about men generally having broader shoulders, women often wider hips, it's just biology. Then he says, okay, picture a really crowded space, like a packed subway car in New York City maybe. If a man and woman sit right next to each other, they tend to fit together quite well.
They fit because, yeah, the shape of one complements the shape of the other, like puzzle pieces. It's his way of illustrating that we were physically designed for reciprocity, designed by nature itself to live for the sake of each other, filling in the gaps, complementing each other. It's a very visceral way to say LSO is baked into creation.
Exactly. It reinforces the idea that this isn't just a nice suggestion. It's a structural law built in.
Okay, now this next part really got me thinking. The sources touch on it, but maybe not super deeply. The mechanism of eternity. Why does living for others guarantee this sort of eternal growth, while living for yourself leads to decay? It seems to hinge on debt and return.
Yeah, this is a bit more complex. It's worth slowing down here. Imagine person A does something for person B, gives them something, helps them out. Now, if person B just pays back exactly what they received and 100%, then the exchange is complete. It ends there. Value is stable. Zero sum, basically.
Okay, makes sense. Standard transaction. But Moon says if you follow the LSO principle, when person B returns the favor, they must give back more than 100%, say 110%. It's that extra bit, the selfless generosity on top.
And that's the engine, because now person A, having received 110%, is obligated by the same principle to live for person B. So person A must return even more, maybe 120%, 130%. You see the cycle. The value of the exchange just keeps increasing perpetually. This back and forth, this upward spiral of generosity, it causes the overall value of the bond, the mutual benefits, to grow eternally.
I get it now. So eternity isn't some static state. It's like compound interest powered by selflessness. And if you only live for yourself, you're only ever giving back 100% at best, probably less. That cycle of increase just stops. It guarantees stagnation, eventual decline. That's why he says the concept of eternity vanishes when you live only for your own sake. Wow.
Exactly. It ties success, longevity, even divinity itself to this specific mechanism.
Right.
And this mechanism also explains, for him, how leadership naturally emerges. Think about that family example he uses, a family of 10 people. He says the youngest member could be anyone, really, but the one who lives most selflessly for the whole family, the one who sacrifices, gives, puts the family first. They will naturally become the central figure. Why? Because they've accumulated the most eternal value by living this divine principle.
And the ultimate outcome of that kind of unity, he claims, is a state where people would actually be grateful to be under the dominion of someone who lives purely for others, even for thousands of years, because that selflessness prevents the power from becoming corrupt or exploitative.
Then he takes this LSO measuring stick and applies it, pretty bluntly actually, to the world stage in the mid-70s. He uses it to diagnose why certain global movements or nations were failing, in his view. First target, communism. He argued it was already declining since about 1957, he says. Why? Because it prioritized the Soviet Union's self-interest, dreaming of world domination centered only on Slavic people. It failed, he says, to live for the sake of the whole world.
And the second example hits closer to home, especially for listeners in the U.S. He says America itself was heading towards decline. Why? Because it had started to abandon the world, as he put it. It decided to pursue its own interests first, instead of fully embracing its role as a leader, existing for the benefit of global democracy.
That's a really strong critique, isn't it? Because it's not about military might or economics. It's purely about philosophical alignment or misalignment with LSO. But conversely, he offered this powerful potential path for Korea. He says, look, Korea is small, but if it genuinely adopts a national worldview of existing only for the sake of the world, makes that its core belief, then it will lead the world in the future. The principle itself guarantees that success eventually follows the servant leader.
Okay, so to make this principle less theoretical, he gives a very concrete, high-stakes example from his own experience. The 1974 United Nations General Assembly, specifically the resolution on Korea. And Moon knew going in that South Korea's position was seen as basically hopeless.
Dire is the word. North Korea had poured huge resources into lobbying delegates, money, political pressure, everything. So what was Moon's counter-strategy? It wasn't traditional lobbying. He sent 68 Unification Church missionaries from 30 different countries. And crucially, not as political operatives. They were sent as agents of LSO, agents of selfless service.
And a large number, 34 I think he mentions, were Japanese women. Their mission was clear, total devotion to the delegates. Quote, live for their sake, counsel them with God's heart. They weren't there to argue policy points. They were there purely to serve.
And the details of that service are really important for understanding LSO in action. They worked around the clock, day and night, running errands for delegates, fetching things, even calling taxis for them at 1 or 2 in the morning, hosting ambassadors, I think from 70 nations, at their Belvedere Conference Center. It wasn't about pushing an agenda through words. It was about demonstrating sacrifice.
And they brought in a specific human angle that apparently really resonated. They focus attention on the plight of Japanese wives who'd been lured to North Korea under false pretenses and were essentially trapped there. That appeal to justice, to human suffering, seems to have been the emotional lever that shifted things away from just cold politics.
The result? Well, he calls it an unimaginable miracle. Apparently, North Korea was so confident they were offering bribes, even held a premature victory toast.
Yeah.
But the missionaries' sheer dedication, their selfless service, it genuinely moved the delegates, changed hearts. South Korea's proposal passed, 61 to 42. North Korea's proposal. It got a 48-48 tie. Failed. For Moon, this was proof positive. LSO could overcome huge political and material disadvantages.
He even turns this LSO formula inward, towards his own organization. He lays out a really clear test for achieving unity between the Unification Church and other groups, like Protestants or Catholics. He says it's simple. His members must love the ministers and members of those other denominations more than they love their own church members.
Wow. That's the ultimate test, isn't it? Sacrifice your own group's immediate interests for the sake of the larger whole. It brings the whole argument full circle, really, back to the grand ideal.
Which he presents as the actual formula for building the kingdom of heaven right here on earth. It's not mystical, it's practical. Just this expanding circle of LSO. The husband lives for the wife, the family for the clan for the wider people, the people for the nation for the world, and ultimately the world for God. If you follow that path, he argues, the kingdom of heaven isn't some future event, it's realized progressively right now.
And just before we finish, he leaves us with a really stark, very personal standard, a way to judge our own ultimate direction, based entirely on this principle. How can you tell if someone's path is leading towards heaven or, well, the other way?
Yeah, it's quite a measure, he says. Look at your whole life. If the part of your life lived for the sake of others is greater, even by just 1%, than the part lived for yourself, then that person is on the road that leads to heaven.
It sets up this fascinating kind of moral accounting, doesn't it? It implies that every small act of selflessness, things that seem minor, they all add up. Yeah. They contribute to that eternally compounding value we talked about. That value ultimately determines your eternal trajectory. It means, in his view, no kindness is ever truly wasted or finite.
So, okay. We've covered a lot. The radical theology of reciprocity, the mechanism of eternal growth through giving more, the political applications, the UN example. Based on all this source material we've explored today, here's maybe one last provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider. If you were to really try and apply this principle, existing for the sake of others, in your own home, maybe your workplace, starting today, what specific, maybe unglamorous, maybe difficult responsibilities would you need to take on to actually become, in his words, a pioneer of tomorrow? Something to think about.